Hello, this is Scott with On the Cross Ministries. Today I want to talk to you about an introduction to the parables. During his earthly ministry, as Jesus went about preaching and teaching, he frequently used parables. It has been estimated that at least 1/3 of Jesus' recorded teaching is found in the parables. Certainly many of his most remembered sayings of Jesus are his parables. It is therefore proper for disciples today to ask such questions as, what is a parable? Why did Jesus teach in parables? What are they about? How should we interpret them? With this lesson, we begin to study the parables of Jesus. This is the first lesson and will serve as an introduction to the parables in general. Succeeding lessons will examine the parables in particular. So let's begin this introduction to the parables. Definition of a parable. The word parable is a translation of the Greek parabole. It means to place beside, to cast alongside. Signifies a placing of one thing beside another with a view to comparison. A story that places one thing beside another for the purpose of teaching. It puts the known next to the unknown so that we may learn. A parable can usually be identified by the use of the word like. As used in the New Testament, a parable is usually a story or a narrative drawn from nature or human circumstances, from which spiritual lessons can be made by comparison. A common definition of parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. The next question often raised is, why did Jesus teach in parables? In other words, why didn't he just speak straightforward when he was teaching? To understand this, we need to consider the purpose of the parables of Jesus. The primary purpose was to conceal. Jesus was speaking in parables because of the hardness of many people's hearts. The disciples' attitudes was such that they were blessed to learn the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. But because of the hard hearts of many of the multitude, Jesus began speaking to them in parables. He would then explain the parables in private to his disciples. By resorting to the parables, Jesus effectively separated truth seekers from the curiosity seekers. Those seeking the truth would say, "Explain to us the parable," whereas the simply curious would easily be sent away. Indeed, Jesus used parables to carry out divine judgment. For whatever has a good heart, listening ears, to him more will be given, and he will have abundance, by virtue of the parable being explained. But whoever does not have a good heart, listening ears, even what he has will be taken away from him, by virtue of being sent away with the multitude. But another purpose of the parables was to reveal. Even though the primary purpose in telling parables was to conceal the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven from the multitude. For once, the disciples understood the basic meaning of the parables. The comparison of the known, earthly truths with the unknown, heavenly truths would send further light onto the unknown. Therefore, with the help of the Lord's explanation of his parables, we can learn more about the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. This leads us to the next question. What are the parables about? Matthew 13:11 gives us a clue. And I read, "He answered to them, because it has been given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given." The general theme is the kingdom of heaven, as suggested in Matthew 13, verse 11. As illustrated with several parables, all which start with, "The kingdom of heaven is like." Indeed, the kingdom of heaven was the theme of Jesus' ministry, his Sermon on the Mount. 3 sub-themes are stressed in the parables. The character of the kingdom, for example, the parable of the mustard seed, the parable of the leaven, the parable of the hidden treasure, and the parable of the pearl of great price. Another sub-theme is the character of the king. For example, the parable of the workers in the vineyard, the parable of the lost son. Another sub-theme is the character of the king's subjects. For example, the parable of the Good Samaritan and the parable of the persistent widow. Of course, the sub-themes often overlap in the parables, but they clearly demonstrate that the overall theme of the parables was the kingdom of heaven. Finally, a few thoughts in answer to the question, how do we interpret the parables? The interpretation of the parables of Jesus, there are two extremes to avoid: seeking to find the spiritual truth in every little detail, and saying that there is only one spiritual truth in every parable. Some guidelines for proper interpretation. Learn from the explanation Jesus gives in these parables. He explains. Understand the parables of the sower helps us to understand other parables. Jesus, therefore, went on to explain that parable. Look for the central truth of the parable, making sure that any other truth gleaned from the parable are in harmony with it. Consider carefully the context of Jesus' words. Look for an introduction or an application which gives insight. As supplied by the Lord himself or as inspired writers. Don't use parables to formulate new doctrine. Remember, parables were originally told to conceal, so they're not always that clear in their meaning. Therefore, don't try to build a case for a doctrine based solely on parables. Now, in conclusion, follow these sensible guidelines to interpret the parables of Jesus. We can look forward to the joy of understanding more fully the mysteries or revealed truths of the kingdom of heaven. As we get into the parables themselves, I hope that we will appreciate how blessed we are to live in an age when people who have desire to learn about the kingdom can do so. Matthew 13, verse 16 through 17 says, "But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For assuredly I say to you, that many prophets and righteous men desired to see what you see, and did not see it, and to hear what you hear, and did not hear it." What we're about to study in the parables concerns things which many great men in the Bible did not fully understand in their lifetimes. Yet these mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, containing things kept secret from the foundation of the world, are now being made through the preaching of the gospel of Christ. Dear friends, I hope you understand what we're going to talk about in these next couple weeks as I delve into the parables. As it says in Romans 16, "Now to him who is able to establish you according to my gospel and the preaching of Jesus Christ, according to the revelation of the mysteries kept secret since the world began, but now has been made manifest by the prophetic scriptures, has been made known to all nations, according to the commandment of the everlasting God, for obedience to the faith." I ask that you come back. I'll try to get more messages out about different parables. I have a whole list of messages I'm going to go through, but this was just an introduction. I hope you enjoy it, and if you have any questions, feel free to send us a line. We're on YouTube, or you can go to On the Cross Ministries 700 at gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.